Well, hello and welcome to another guest interview here on the Profit with Law podcast. I'm your host, Moshe Amsel, and I have a treat for you because today we're going to be talking to another fellow Profit First professional. Rocky and I met at ProfitCon, which is I actually don't know if ProfitCon is open to the public or if it's just for Profit First professionals. I think it's open to the public, but Mike Michalowicz and his team over at Profit First Professionals put on a conference called ProfitCon, where we spend a few days delving deeper into business and profit topics, but more importantly, mindset, overcoming objections and things like that, both for ourselves and for our clients. So Rocky and I connected there and we said, hey, you have a podcast, I have a podcast, let's go on each other's shows and share with each other's audiences. So I was a guest on his show. The show is Profit Answer Man. And you can check it out. It's episode 155. The title of the show is Profit First and Profit Levers with Moshe Amsel. And we created a nice little link for you, profitwithlaw.com/profit answer man, no spaces. So you can put that in your URL and it'll take you straight to that interview where you can hear our conversation together on Rocky's podcast. I have him here today and we're going to try to extract some insight that you haven't heard yet here on the podcast, or a new spin or a new way of thinking about your business and or your business financials, and help you overcome something that you're challenged with today. So I'm excited to jump in this conversation, but I have the official intro to share with you. So I'll read that now. Rocky Lalvani is the Profit Answer Man. He teaches them how to ensure they get paid and make profit a priority. As a certified Profit First professional, he implements Mike Michalowicz's Profit First system. We changed the accounting formula of sales minus expenses equals profit to sales minus profit equals expenses. This ensures profit comes first. P.S. It's not about money at all costs. People come before money. Rocky started with nothing when his parents immigrated to the United States when he was 2 years old, and his parents were in their 40s. It's interesting because I immigrated from Ohio to New York when I was 2. So we both changed locations. Mine was a little bit less drastic than yours. It was his parents' second time starting over in life as they moved here to experience the American dream in spite of a lot of struggles, and his mom passing away when Rocky was 7. I'm sorry to hear that. He has been able to achieve financial and life success. Rocky loves to share his journey and inspire others to achieve their dreams even faster. Rocky, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me here today.
It's my pleasure to have you. And more importantly, we appreciate you taking time out of your day to share with our audience. What I like to do when we start an episode, and I just gave the cliff notes of your official bio, but people they want to know who's this guy Rocky and what, what's his authority to talk on this subject. So give us a little bit more color to your backstory. Share with us just how'd you get into this and become an expert on this topic?
So I think from the time I was a kid, I was very entrepreneurial. So I grew up in Jersey, which meant I went into New York City and I'd buy stuff wholesale and I'd bring it back and I'd sell it to my friends at 100% markup. So I was kind of like the Five Below before Five Below existed. And I was always a kid who from a young age wanted to make money and to be wealthy. And so I would be always just learning about that and studying it and figuring it out, more from an investment standpoint versus necessarily an entrepreneurial standpoint. We had limited resources back then, no internet. We had to listen to AM radio to get our information and try and figure out how to do all of this. The other thing was, it was the beginning of the tech age. So I bought my first computer, which was an Apple II with a whopping 4K of memory. It cost a fortune back then. It was a couple grand. But one of the first programs I really started to play with was VisiCalc, which was one of the first electronic spreadsheets long before Excel and Lotus 1-2-3. And adults started to see, hey, here's a teenager who knows how to go from paper ledger to electronic sheets. Let's put him into places to have him do that. I never understood the value of that. I never understood how to turn that into a marketable practice or anything else. So I just went out, I made my wealth, I did well. And the reason I joined Profit First is because they use the same principles I use to build wealth in automating and putting things into separate accounts and giving everything and every dollar a purpose and sending it to do that. And then once I had done all that, I'm like, well, what do I really want to do? And I spent a lot of time on the personal finance side, realized that wasn't the best. And then I got to learn that most business owners weren't looking at their financials. And I'm like, how can that be? You're a business owner. You have to look at your financials. And then I realized they went into business to do what they love, and accounting wasn't on the list. And so that's where my skills, my background, I'm an EA, so I understand tax, I understand the numbers, I have an MBA. And like, to me, spreadsheets tell stories. So when I look at people's numbers, they tell me a story, which then begins questions, and we uncover how to make it better.
I love that, and it's really a good place for us to kick off the conversation. And that is, you made the statement that most business owners don't look at their financials. And we know Mike Michalowicz dubs the terminology of what they do use bank balance accounting, where basically you wake up in the morning, check your bank balance, and determine whether you have something you need to cover. Are you flush with cash, and can you go on a spending spree? And not really looking at the big picture or at the drivers. Now, I hope that our audience listening to the show, a lot of them have been listening for a while, have already come around and drunk from the Kool-Aid a bit and are paying a little bit more attention. But as a business owner who doesn't have an accounting background, what should they do with those financial statements or numbers or reports or whatever it is? Do you have a step-by-step process that you have business owners go through to have a recurring review of those financials?
So we do have a step-by-step process, but the reality is we don't ask the business owners to do it because most of them don't want to. Are we allowed to tell attorney jokes?
I don't know. I think so. We'll find out if the subscriber count goes down, then we know we shouldn't do that.
Well, so the question is, the attorney joke is, why'd you go to law school? Well, because there's no math class, right? And the reality is the same thing happens in medical school. These people go to medical school, they don't have math class, they don't have business class. And yet you're coming out and you're running your own business, and no one has taught you the fundamentals of business. And unfortunately, that's the case. And it's not your fault. It's just the way the system was derived. Most of my business owners don't want to look at them. It's boring. It's dull. It's not their thing. What they want from me is to say, tell me what happened. Tell me why it happened. Tell me how I fix it. Tell me how I can grow and be better. The problem is these accounting reports were not designed for business owners. They were designed for bankers and Wall Street, right? So you can look at your profit and loss, and your profit and loss will say you're profitable. And what I invariably listen to when I hear from business owners is they're like, well, my accountant told me I was profitable, but there's no cash in the bank. Or my accountant told me I lost money and the bank account's full. It's like, well, that's the problem. The report you get from your profit and loss doesn't necessarily show your cash flow. Most people use QuickBooks, depending on their business size. The cash flow reports in QuickBooks don't give you good answers. They don't really show you a true picture. Your true wealth is built on the balance sheet, but most business owners and most people don't know how to read a balance sheet, and they don't know how to compare a balance sheet from month to month to month. I always call it's like, where's Waldo? You ever see those two pictures? There's like, find the 9 differences in these two pictures, and you spend hours trying to figure out, oh, that shoe had a buckle and that one didn't. That's what accounting reports are like for most people. They don't really tell you the true picture. So for us, what we do is we go through all those reports. And I'll be honest, I have a gift for seeing a story or seeing a pattern or seeing something out of the norm. And then I dig through and I just bring awareness to the business owner. And then we help them. The biggest thing we do is we help them figure out what is my next step that's going to give me the best leverage. So in some businesses, we'll look at their business and we're like, you're spending too much, which everyone hears. I just got a new client who they're at $10 million in revenue. And what I basically told him is, you don't have a spending problem. You have a pricing problem, right? They're not pricing their product appropriately to drive their margins. Other businesses have a revenue generation problem, right? One month they're busy, the next month nothing's going on. Well, that creates all kinds of cash flow issues. So I think it's helping them understand that. Can you do that on your own? Absolutely. Is it learnable? Yes. The question you have to ask yourself is, do you want to devote time to it? Or would you rather somebody else wear this hat? And there's a lot of that, I think, comes down to money mindsets and money behaviors. So it's much more psychological than it is just knowledge and book learning.
Yeah, interestingly, most accountants are not having these conversations with their clients. And so what do we call the person who's doing that for somebody? Is that like fractional CFO services? Is that really what we're talking about?
So yes, that's probably the word. That's the right word, is fractional CFO. Here's the problem. I think fractional CFOs come in two flavors, right? One fractional CFO is much more about process and making sure everything's perfect and overseeing the entire system and doing all the math. Another kind of fractional CFO is one that helps you to read the tea leaves and figure out what are your best next steps. The problem with most CFOs is they tell you not to spend money, right? And that's a problem. The other thing is, if you're a small business owner, $1 million, 2 million in revenue, you look at a fractional CFO as overkill. And so it's a question of, can you get enough help without being overkill at a reasonable price? And the other half of that is, you talk about accountants. Accountants don't necessarily understand business. They don't understand how to generate revenue. Unless they're the partner in charge and is familiar with all of this, you're dealing with someone who's more apt to know how to fill out a tax return than to fill out and figure out how to grow your business.
All right, so I want to move gears in this conversation, because other than hiring a fractional CFO, I don't know that we're going to do a full-on training of financial statement analysis on this podcast, but there are some universal principles or things that we can look at that are going to drive profit. And interestingly, the conversation that you and I had on the podcast, on your podcast, where you interviewed me, we ended up talking about profit levers. And I don't even recall, what the specifics were that we talked about, but I want to have that same conversation with you here, with you driving the conversation, and really honing in on what are the keys to profitability. And I've been doing these sessions. I call them brainstorm sessions. I've been running these brainstorm sessions where I just have a bunch of attorneys come into the room. It's free. It's really like the tip of the iceberg of some of the marketing for our programming that we do. But in that session, I basically dive into a specific topic, but it always starts with this concept of, if we look at the accounting formula, and I know that Profit First switches the formula, but if we just go to the traditional formula of profit, of revenue minus expenses equals profit, and we understand simple algebra, we can understand that if we need the profit number to rise, then we need to either lower the expenses or raise the revenue, right? So essentially, when we're talking about profit levers, it's all looking at the nuances of what makes up revenue and what makes up expenses so that we can find ways to do more with less or do more with more, right? So let's dive into that for a moment. And when you're working with, and you started to allude to this, right? You said like inconsistent revenue means you probably have a client acquisition problem, and but you have a $10 million business where their problem is pricing. So what are some things that our listeners can look at to start to recognize or realize what are the levers they can pull to change their profit conversation in their business?
So let's start at the beginning. In order to get business, someone has to know about you, right? So I think the first lever is awareness of your ability to perform a service for them. And so that's the first thing. Now, unfortunately, in today's world, everyone tells you to spend a ton of money on getting awareness. And that's a slippery slope. If you can figure out a way to build awareness without spending money, it is much better for you. There's trade-offs there. So the first question is, how many people are aware of us? And if you aren't tracking some sort of number or metric, that's a problem. So it could be number of people coming to your website. It could be number of incoming leads. Like how many times does the phone ring and someone say, I'd like to do, I need an attorney, I need help. So that's the first question. And what does it cost you to get that number of people to call you? The second question is, what percentage of those people actually become a client? So let's say I get 10 phone calls. And out of the 10 phone calls, I get one client. Well, you might think that's good, but rather than spending money to now double your leads to 20 so that you get 2 clients, what about thinking about your sales process or your intake process or that whole handling, that instead of just getting 10 to 1, what if we could get 10 to 2? A little bit of thinking about your business and you just doubled your revenue without spending a penny. That's the kind of stuff we like to focus on. Or maybe it's just tweaking the ad or whatever it is that you're doing. So instead of getting 10 for the money you spent, you get 20 for the money you spent. And I think that's the first lever to look at is, how do we get business in the door?
Interestingly, maximizing efficiency of leads or efficiency of ad spend, which is what you just laid out, it has another benefit, which is it gives you more firepower to increase that spend or increase that investment in time or whatever it is that you need to do to now get more leads in the door. So if you first make it more efficient before you try to add more leads, what you're doing is you're making it easier to add more leads when you get there. So besides for increasing your profitability today, it's also giving you more firepower for tomorrow.
Correct. So once we have the all of this and they come in and they become a client, the first question is, what's your pricing model? Do you appropriately price? Historically, it's always been billing time, right? In increments. It's really nice. And I've had talks with attorneys about going more to, we'll call it a flat price or a recurring revenue model where they pay you a flat monthly fee to handle their issues. This way, your revenue is consistent throughout the year. You don't have to worry about it. You're not worried as much about tracking time. They're not worried as much about picking up the phone and calling you. It's taking friction out of your relationship with your client. So I think a lot of times it's appropriate pricing. And then next is, what does it cost to deliver the service? And what I mean is the attorney's time or the paralegal's time. What is their time actually cost you? And what's the spread between that time and what you're actually billing out. So that gives us our gross margin. It tells us, okay, here's how much money came in, how much it cost us to deliver the service. Now I have my gross margin. Now I need to run my business on the gross margin, which is all the other expenses.
Now, if we flip the conversation around, right, and we say, how do I know if I'm pricing my services correctly? I can check and make sure that I'm getting the gross margin I need to have a healthy business, right? So, what is a healthy gross margin? What should be the target that we're looking for? In other words, if I take the cost to deliver the service, let's say I'll give an example for our listeners, so this is not so abstract. Let's say I'm an estate planning attorney, and I know that in order to do a will and trust for a client, it's going to cost 4 hours of my attorney's time, and it's going to cost 4 hours of paralegal time, and then 20 hours of legal assistant time. And I have the cost of all of that, and I know it's going to cost me $1,500 or $2,000 for all those people. Let's use 2,000, right? So now the question is the when you charge a price above that, that's not all profit, right? It's a lot of that's going to overhead, and then you got to pay the owner and the taxes, all of that stuff. So what is the magic number that we want to try to strive for once we take those expenses into account, or the cost of delivery into account?
I don't know that there's a magic number, but I know that there's some minimum. So first of all, when you calculate that amount, don't forget above the hourly rate to include benefits and your portion of the Social Security and Medicare taxes and everything else. So you want a true picture of what that cost is. If you just look at the hourly salary, I think you're missing 10, 20, 30% of the number. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, no wonder I'm in trouble. We tell business owners in general, if you have less than a 30% gross profit, you're in trouble in general. Beyond that, I don't know. Are there averages in the world of attorneys? Is at least 100? Like, I would almost think at minimum, because it's a service business, you almost want a 50% gross margin to cover everything else. But that's a guess because I don't know what most attorneys are doing.
Yeah, so it's a very interesting, because this is put me on the spot, right? I have never approached the conversation from this exact question. So I don't come to this conversation prepared with a number, but I will tell you that the general rule of thumb that we work with our clients on, and it varies from business to business and I'll tell you why in a second, but generally we want to see 20% of revenue going to your attorneys, 20% to the support staff to deliver legal services. So that's 40% to the total people involved in the actual work for the client. And then 20% to overhead, which includes marketing. And then 40% your profit margin, right? So we target a 35 to 50% profit margin, not gross profit margin, but profit margin on the business. And it, you have that 60% to work with, depending on how you slice it. So for example, somebody who's a criminal law attorney, they're going to be a lot more heavy on the legal side because most of the delivery of service is happening in the courtroom. So it's tying up an attorney's time. Whereas the other example I just gave with an estate planning attorney, you can have a $5,000 to $7,000 engagement, and the attorney is only spending 3 to 4 hours on it. If you structure your team properly and everybody's trained properly, the attorney is not really needed for anything except for final review and to be present at the signing, and probably present at the onset to have the initial conversation with the client. So in an estate planning practice, you'll probably get away with less than 20% for the attorney and a greater percentage for your support staff. So that's how we've looked at it. So I guess if we back into this conversation, we say, well, we were looking at basically 40% as your cost. So we know that we need approximately a 3-to-2 ratio, right? So we probably need to triple the cost of delivery into your pricing structure. So in my example, $2,000 cost to deliver that estate plan would need a $6,000 price tag on delivery of service to back into. Now we're 40% cost of delivery.
And that makes sense. And again, every business is slightly different and every model is different. Somebody might go for high volume, high throughput with high efficiency. So you could take that same estate plan and say, well, I'm going to sell it for 4,000, but I've created the efficiencies that it doesn't cost me as much to deliver it. I can do it for less, or I'm just going to make it up in volume, which I don't recommend because I never want to work harder to make less. I'd rather work less and make more. And so it's how you can add value to the conversation. And the other part of that is, have you ever talked about value pricing?
We kind of lump flat fee and value pricing into one bucket. I never had an entire podcast on value pricing. I do know that the number one person I look at for value pricing is in the accounting industry, and that's Mark Wickersham. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's over in the UK, but he wrote a book on value pricing. He's got a whole training program on it. And I thoroughly understand it on the accounting side. On the legal services side, it becomes difficult in certain aspects of law. It's very easy to place value when there's a monetary gain on the other side of it, right? And contingency-based law firms like personal injury and medical malpractice do a really good job at unlocking the true value of a client because they charge a percentage of what they can get the client. But in all other areas, if we look at a business attorney, value-based pricing can make a lot of sense because we can, if we're litigating a business issue, we can determine what the risk level is for the client, right? Like they have $2 million at risk. So if we charge them $200,000 to avoid a $2 million risk, 10%, that's tremendous value. And then we can have a flat fee for that engagement that we're willing to step into if that makes sense for us, and unlock the true value of that matter. But if you go to like family law or criminal law, where it's much harder to figure out what is the value of getting me through this divorce, and what is the value of getting, of preventing jail time or whatever it is that we're doing on the criminal side. So that's where the conundrum lies, is like, okay, who can use value-based pricing? But what are your thoughts on it?
Well, I think you have to figure it out. Again, it depends on the type of law. And I think it also depends on efficiencies. So how quickly and how efficiently can you deliver allows you to pick up a greater margin. But again, as you said, you've got to sell the other side of the value of that equation. And, keeping somebody out of jail, it depends who they are, right? Some people value that more than others. It's the reality of it. In business, what is this going to prevent or allow? And so if you can come up with that and I think the goal of value-based pricing is you get away from time and billing, right? You charge a flat amount, and there's risk on your part, there's risk on the client part, but if you know how to do that well, you can get a much higher margin by doing that. And you can be much more efficient in how you deliver because you're not worried about the clock.
Yeah, I think that with any of these alternative billing models, whether it's flat fee, value-based pricing, or recurring revenue, the goal of all of them is to do three things. One, to fix the relationship between the attorney and the client, so that it's not a contentious relationship, and it's a relationship where the client is comfortable knowing that they have a cap on their cost, and that they're going to be covered and they're not going to be surprised by stuff that comes up. That's not to say that you can have triggers that changes the total price. So for example, if you're a criminal attorney and you have a flat fee of $2,000 to deal with a DWI, you might put a caveat in there that, that $2,000 covers 2 court appearances. If you end up needing a 3rd or 4th court appearance for whatever reason, each additional court appearance is $500. Like you can put those triggers in to protect the risk level for you, because there are surprises that come up, because you can't control what the other party does, right? Like if your client, right? If your client doesn't show up, now you're on the hook to go the next time, and there's no ramifications to them. So you have to protect yourself. So that's one, is to take away the contentious relationship. The second is to unlock your ability to profit from more than just the difference between the amount of time you're paying for and the amount of you're charging for that time. And that difference is what Rocky keeps going back to and talking about, which is the efficiency, the systems and processes in your firm, the implementation of technology to streamline what you're doing and innovate and find ways to deliver services in a better way and a faster way to your client. Without these alternative billing arrangements, you have absolutely no motivation to do that, because it's in your best interest to take your time, to be slow, to not be efficient. Because if you try to push the work down to somebody who's not a billable person, then who's paying for that, right? Even to push something down to the paralegal and not have the attorney handle it, it's a lower hourly rate, and therefore it's a lower markup. It's a lower amount of profit that you're making on that work. So you're always motivated to try to push the work up to the highest individual instead of pushing it down to the lowest paid individual, which is contrary to any business math that we would do. So those are the 2 primary reasons. I'm forgetting what the third one was that I wanted to share, but I think that when we look at these alternative billing models, you're not going to get it right on day one, right? And you need to give yourself the grace to step into the new you that you have allowed by implementing this, to allow the creativity to flow, to allow you to start to come up with ideas of how to make it more efficient. Those are going to happen over time. The efficiencies don't get built overnight, and you got to get team buy-in. You got to perhaps implement new technology. All of those are going to be projects you need to do, and slowly they'll build on each other to create more and more profitability as you implement them and as you get better at it. You're also not going to get the pricing right on day one, right? You're going to put your inputs in on your best guess of what you think it's going to be, and you're going to be wrong, you're going to be right, and you have to look at the overall averages and make sure you're tracking in the right direction. One of the top things that I hear from clients and even non-clients who I'm just having conversations with is, "Oh, I tried that and I got burned, so I went back to hourly billing," right? And the key to understand is that you didn't get burned. It's a law of averages. You're going to have some clients that are just going to be a bigger time suck on your firm than other clients, but you're going to have a lot of clients that you make more than you would have made if they were hourly, and they're going to kind of weigh each other out. They're going to kind of average each other out. And your job as the business owner now becomes to find what the true equation is, to figure out where the efficiency, factors are. Where can you unlock that profitability? But ultimately, if we're not able to unlock a better profit margin from flat fee or value or recurring than we are with hourly billing, it's not necessarily the right thing to do. You got to be able to unlock that additional profitability. What are your thoughts, Rocky?
And I agree with that. I think the other thing to throw in there, and we haven't talked about it, is the advent of AI now, and the ability to implement AI to be able to help you do things faster, quicker, easier. And if you're billing by the hour, AI is not your friend. But if you're billing by value pricing, AI is your best buddy, right? And it changes your value prop. And you might say, well, I don't want to implement, but if the guy next door does, now you've got a problem. So, yeah, I think that, these are all the types of things that you've got to sit down and think about within your business. And I think that's the biggest problem. Most business owners are too busy doing the business and not enough time thinking about the business. And at this point, we still haven't even talked about operations and all the costs that go below the line.
Yeah, so let's actually switch gears because we got about 10 minutes and we got to wrap it up because got another interview right behind you. But let's talk about below the line. So we talked about, the gross profit margin where you take your revenue and you take out your or you look at the cost of delivery. And that's your gross profit margin. But below the line, and it's interesting because we're accountants, right? So we're like, below the line makes sense to us, but to other people it doesn't. It's the mathematical line where you take the two numbers we just said, and now you've got what's left, and now you've got the more math, right? But essentially, you have rent, you have staff that's just supporting the firm itself, like a receptionist, or a file clerk, which are not being attributed directly to the delivery of service to the client. You have technology, you have implementation of systems and processes, you have vendors, outside vendors you're paying, like your accountant, your bookkeeper, things like that. Marketing costs, all of those things are things that we haven't even looked at or discussed. So how do you approach those, Rocky? And what are the top levers you find that your clients are able to pull to become more efficient or increase profitability in those categories?
So when we look at those, we try to break it down and make it simple. We take all this complex stuff and we try to make it as simple as possible. So one of the costs we always look at is marketing. What is it costing me to drive revenue? And so we're always evaluating marketing costs and are we getting a return on marketing? What's driving it? Is it the Facebook ad? Is it the SEO? Is it, Google ads? Is it TV commercials? Is it a billboard? How do you know it's working? So measuring that. The second one is labor. Labor is one of the most expensive things in most businesses. So tracking your labor and saying, is it efficient? So what we will do is we will divide your gross profit by your labor and say, what that does is it gives me a number, which says for every dollar I'm paying my general laborers, how much revenue are they able to bring in at a gross profit level? And if that number is not at least 1.8 to 2, your employees aren't efficient or you've got inefficiencies in your system. And then we look at the other general overhead. So the reality is everyone thinks you need a fancy office. You don't, right? So that's wasted money more often than not. The fancy car is more often than not wasted money. If you want it, great, but understand it comes out of overhead. People aren't doing business with you for those reasons. So being very careful on all the subscriptions, all the software, all the this and that, more often than not, you may not even be using it anymore and you're still paying for it. So looking at all the different costs and saying what's reasonable and where can I cut costs? Where can I remove things that either aren't valuable anymore, duplicative, meaning we're paying two different services for the same thing, because things are constantly changing. Or maybe your contract expired and they doubled your rate and you didn't even know. It happens all the time. It's the cable company, the phone company, other types of things. If you're under a contract and that expires, then what's it costing you? So I think being able to understand, that's what we call the bulk of what's costing your business money, because it's not necessarily driving your revenue. And how do we keep that as low as possible? If you want to change your rent, it's going to take time, right? It takes time to move. It takes time to renegotiate leases. These are not decisions that happen overnight. These are decisions that happen over time.
Yeah, and I think that, when we didn't talk about profit first at all today, but in Profit First, one of the, the concept is basically have separate accounts so that your money is being allocated to where it's supposed to go. So you're not dipping into your tax money in order to buy a printer for your office, right? So that kind of thing. But the key to Profit First successful implementation in a business is to have a transition plan from where you are today to where you need to be when your business is at its healthiest, which is your target allocations. And the length of time that's recommended in the book is 18 months, right? At 6 quarters. You're looking at me like I'm
I've heard Mike say 2.5 years. That's
really?
why I tell my clients it's 2.5 years, because change takes longer than you think it does.
I'll give you 2.5 years. I think that our initial calculators that they gave us and at as PFPs had an 18-month time frame built into it. I've always found that we're able to make so much drastic change over the first 12 months that we can actually see the light at the end of the tunnel once you're 1 year into the process. But even if we say 2.5 years, it's funny because we when we want to fix a problem, we want to fix it immediately, right? And when we hear it's going to take 2.5 years, it sounds like an eternity. But when we look back, 2.5 years is a blink of an eye. I'm marrying off 2 of my kids now, and it's like, what's going on? I was a kid a moment ago, right? And they were born a moment ago, and then they were like in first grade a moment ago. Like, where did all this time go? How did this happen? Just kind of crept up on me. The reality is that 2.5 years is not a lot of time. But I think it's important to approach this from recognizing that just the fact that you start paying attention is really the key to making results happen. And then it's a matter of sticking to it, right? Like, so much of what I do. So I have a coaching program. It's called Elite. And we work with clients on an annual basis in that program. And the reason that we have them commit to a year-long commitment with us is because 90% of what we do is helping you stay true to the project you decided you were going to do. So at the beginning of a quarter, you say, hey, I figured out that the most pressing need I have right now is to implement a marketing strategy that's going to bring in, 10 new leads a month. And then 3 weeks later, you barely begun the project, and all of a sudden you're like, well, the most pressing thing for me right now is to redo the signage on my walls. And you get completely sidetracked for 6 weeks doing that, right? And you're laughing, so let's jump in here, Rocky.
Is that going to drive more business? Like, is someone come to you and go, you know what? I decided to do business with you because of the signage on the wall. It's vanity.
Yeah, it's true. But our listeners are, they're nodding their heads. They're like, yeah, it might not be the signage, but there's always something. There's always a distraction. There's a new idea that came up in the shower where all of a sudden we're going in a different direction. And you just need somebody to hold you accountable to what you said you were going to do. And you need to be drawn back to that. And that's really the key. Like, why does it take 2.5 years? Why can't it take 18 months? Why does it take some people 20 years to achieve a level of success? It's because we keep getting in our own way. We keep changing gears and deciding something else has a higher priority, starting something and stopping it, building it halfway, saying it doesn't work and abandoning it completely instead of learning a lesson from it and keep on going. A business coach of mine says all the time, like, business is not exciting. It's boring. And the problem is as business owners, we try to make it exciting by complicating it. And the reality is it's much more simple than that. And if we simply did the same thing every day, day in, day out, and didn't make it so complicated, we'd be much better off. We'd have much more success. And I think that's really, when we start looking at these numbers and figuring out where's the room for improvement? Where can I fix things? Yeah, we had a great, Rocky brought up a really great point. Don't try to get more leads if you haven't figured out how to efficiently convert those leads into clients, right? So focus your efforts on increasing that conversion. Get really religious about it. Be consistent about it. And once you have a very good conversion rate, then spend more money on the marketing side to bring more leads in. Even spending more money on the marketing side to bring more leads in is not just the answer, right? Like, how efficient are those marketing dollars? Can they be bringing more leads that you can then increase the conversion of, and get clients out of? So as you start looking at each of these things and saying, okay, here I've identified a place that if we got better at this, that would increase our profitability and our overall performance. Well, guess what? Focus on it, stick to it, right? Like, that's just get religious about staying on point with that. All right. Any thoughts on this conversation, Rocky? We're going to close out in a moment.
No, I think the only reason that I think it takes so long is if you're in contractual obligations, it takes a while for those to end, to turn over, to bring about the change. And so we just tell people this is not an overnight fix. You got to keep showing up and doing the work. That's all. And if you can go faster, great. But I like to set realistic expectations that it's going to take time depending on where your starting point is.
Yeah, really, really good points. And that's true. Like, if you're talking about big things like rent, or large technology contracts, like pieces of software that are basically running your business, and you're thinking, okay, I need to get off of this and onto something else, you might be locked in for a certain period. Employees, like if you have international contractors and you've engaged somebody and it's a period of time for that contract, you gotta stay true to your word and finish those out. So really good point. All right, so as we close out the show, Rocky, I just want to ask you, I ask each of my guests, can you share one parting piece of advice or wisdom with our audience? The second thing is I ask you to share, how can they learn more about you, get in touch with you? We kind of covered that in the green room before the show. And I know that you want to share your podcast. So I'm going to, ask you to do that as well. But I just want to remind the audience that we have a special link for you to be able to easily find it. And that's to go to profitwithlaw.com / what was it? Profit Answer Man / Profit Answer Man. Rocky.
So yes, thank you. We did not talk as much about Profit First. If you haven't implemented Profit First, my one thing that I tell people is just go open one extra bank account and just put 1% of your revenue in there. Just start building that habit. It's like going to the gym and starting light, just start. And you'll start to be surprised at how you won't miss the money and how it grows. Next, and you didn't ask, if Moshe's giving you value, would you be so nice as to hit the like button? Would you leave a review? Would you share it with another attorney? It is a great way to say thank you to him, and I am sure he will appreciate it. If you want to continue hearing how we go back and forth, he was on my podcast. He's got the link there for you. We deal and we dig into all of these areas in much more depth, and we break it all out for you. It's all free. You get to learn for free. So take advantage of it.
Awesome. Rocky, thank you so much for your time today and your insight. Just really a great conversation, a new way to look at things. I'm gonna come up with some formulas for our clients to use to kind of determine if their flat fee pricing or their subscription-based pricing is right based on the input costs, and see if that can help them move the needle on making sure that their services are priced correctly, which I think is with a lot of clients, when they come through, there's room for price increases, and who sets the price, right? And typically we look at the marketplace and we say, what are other people charging? But when you're charging flat fee and other people are not charging flat fee, you can't start to compare those, right? And there's a huge value that you provide by putting a cap a cap on that cost for your client. And believe it or not, people are willing to pay a higher amount than what's projected with the hourly, because they know good and well that those hours can run up and far exceed whatever the prediction of hourly spend would be. And they'd much rather know that there's a cap, that this is the most it's going to be. This is what I'm going to be paying. And you need to be able to untap and unlock that value. And it's based on you running a healthy business, right? If your business is not healthy from a profit perspective, you're going to have difficulty serving your clients. Because if you can't be profitable, if you can't run your business efficiently, you're not going to be able to be around. You're not going to be able to expand. You're not going to have the war chest you need to grow. And that's really the key. So you got to fix this issue. You got to be able to be profitable, be healthy in the way you run your business. And Rocky gave us some really good ideas that you can run with. Folks, thank you so much for tuning in here. We really appreciate you being here. We're here every single Thursday with a brand new episode. Sometimes we release some new ones, bonus ones in between, but we will be back next week with another great interview. Make sure to hit the subscribe button if you're not already subscribed to the show, so you get notified when that episode's released. Until next week, just focus on profitability, stick to one thing, and just keep at it. The key to business is consistency. The ones who are successful are the ones who didn't give up. Don't give up. Just keep going. You got this. Take care.